I stayed silent for 25 years. Not the kind of silence that brings peace or calm, but the kind that sits heavy in your chest, the kind that builds invisible walls around you and everyone you love. I thought I was protecting my daughter. I thought my silence was a shield, keeping her safe from pain I was convinced she could never handle. I was wrong. My name is Laura Mitchell, and for 25 years, I carried a secret that defined the rhythm of my life. The way I walked, the way I smiled, the way I loved. My daughter Emily had always been my center, my reason to breathe, my reason to endure. She was 3 when it all started. I remember the tiny curve of her lips, the way her curls bounced when she ran, and the innocent trust she gave me that I swore I would never break. Her father, Daniel, had been my husband for 4 years. From the outside, we were the perfect family. A small suburban home, weekend grocery trips, bedtime stories that ended with a kiss, and the smell of fresh-baked bread on Sunday mornings. Everyone thought we were happy normal. But behind closed doors, the foundations of that normalcy were already cracking. I still remember the evening when Daniel asked me to sit with him in the living room. Emily was asleep upstairs in her crib, humming softly in her dreams, and I remember the faint sound of her breath mingling with the ticking of the wall clock. Daniel's face was pale, his hands shaking as he twisted the ring on his finger. "Laura," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Something I've never admitted to anyone, not even myself." I had no idea what was coming, and I braced myself for betrayal, for an affair, for news that would shatter the life I thought I knew. But the words he spoke were far worse, far more personal, far more destructive than anything I could have imagined. "I can't be the man you married," he said. "I don't know who I am, and I never have. I've been pretending. I've been living a lie." My chest tightened. My stomach knotted, and I felt as though the room had shrunk around us. And then he said something I will never forget. "Please, Laura, don't ever tell Emily." In that single sentence, the weight of 25 years of silence began to press down on me. 2 weeks later, he left. No fights, no screaming, just a quiet departure, a single suitcase by the door, and he was gone. Emily asked where he had gone, and I told her he had gone on a long work trip. That was my first lie, my first step into a world of secrets that would consume me for decades. Raising Emily alone was exhausting. I worked 2 jobs, a day shift at a dental office, a night shift at a grocery store, and in between, I tried to be everything she needed. I missed birthdays, school plays, parent-teacher meetings, but I never missed tucking her in at night. Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck as she whispered, "Mommy, you're my best friend." Those words, so small and simple, kept me alive when everything else felt like it was falling apart. But the silence was eating me from the inside out. Every time Emily asked about her father, every innocent question about where he was, I smiled and invented another layer of protection, another lie, thinking I was shielding her from pain. "Your dad loved you. He just wasn't ready to be a parent," I would say. And in saying those words, I was slowly suffocating myself. Emily grew older, and the questions grew sharper. "Did Dad love you? Was it my fault? Why doesn't he call?" I would answer as carefully as I could, with a calmness I did not feel, inventing reasons, creating stories, hiding the truth. And every time, my heart broke a little more. By the time she was 10, she had stopped asking. That silence, that absence of curiosity, terrified me more than her questions ever had. She had learned to hold back from me the way I had learned to hold back from myself. I tried dating once. It didn't last. How can you build anything real, anything honest, when the foundation of your life is a series of lies? I threw myself into work, into routine, into control. Silence felt safer than love. Years passed. Emily grew into a strong, independent, kind young woman. She graduated from high school, went to college, made friends, traveled, fell in love, learned to navigate the world without me holding her hand every step of the way. And still, in the quiet moments, the evenings when the house was empty and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me. It had been 25 years of silence, of stories left untold, of questions never answered, of truths never shared. And then, one Sunday afternoon, everything changed. Emily, now 25, sat across from me at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee slowly, her eyes not meeting mine. The light through the window fell across her face, highlighting her curiosity, her patience, her growing sense of the world she was trying to understand. She looked up finally, and with a voice calm and steady, asked the question I had spent 25 years fearing. "Mom, why did Dad really leave?" My heart stopped. My chest tightened. My hands trembled. This was not a child asking for comfort anymore. This was a woman seeking truth, and I realized in that moment that I could no longer hide behind lies. I wanted to say nothing, to invent another story, to shield her from the pain I had carried for decades. But something in her eyes stopped me. Something that demanded honesty, even if it shattered the fragile image of our lives. So I took a deep breath, the kind that feels like it comes from the very bottom of your chest, and I began to speak. I told her everything. About Daniel's fears, his confessions, my agreement to remain silent. About the nights I cried alone, the tears I thought she would never see, the moments I pretended to be strong when I was falling apart inside. "I thought I was protecting you," I whispered, but I was really protecting myself from the pain of explaining. Emily listened without interruption. Her eyes were wide, calm, absorbing every word. She did not judge, she did not cry, she simply held her gaze, waiting for the story to unfold, waiting for the truth to land where it needed to. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked finally. "Because I was scared," I said. "Scared of hurting you, scared of changing your perception of your father, scared of everything I couldn't control." She nodded slowly, and then said something I will never forget. "Mom, I needed honesty, not protection." The weight of 25 years of silence began to lift, just a little, in that moment. We cried together, the kind of crying that carries years of pain, years of unsaid words, years of unshared truths. And as we cried, something shifted. I realized that silence does not make us strong, truth does. And sometimes, the question we fear the most is the one that sets us free. We spent hours talking about Daniel, about the past, about our fears, our regrets, our dreams, our forgiveness. By the time the sun began to set, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I had not realized I had been carrying for decades. In that moment, I understood that honesty, even when it hurts, is the truest form of love. After that day, the house felt different, though nothing had physically changed. The same walls, the same furniture, the same kitchen table where we had shared countless meals, but everything had shifted. Emily and I were no longer bound by silence. There was a weight lifted, but also a raw, new awareness. I had spent a lifetime hiding the truth, and now it was out in the open. I watched her stare out the window, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug, and I wondered how much of my fear had transferred to her over the years. How much had she learned about caution, about restraint, about pretending everything was fine, simply because I had done the same? I wanted to tell her everything, not just about Daniel, not just about the night he confessed, but about the years of fear, the nights of tears, the moments I felt completely alone even when she was sleeping right next to me. I began to recount my memories, not in neat order, but as they surfaced, one painful, honest moment at a time. I told her about the first night he left, when I sat on the edge of Emily's crib and watched her tiny chest rise and fall, wondering how I would manage without him. I told her about the nights I cried silently in the bathroom, thinking she would never understand why her father had abandoned us. I told her about the countless moments I had questioned my own decisions, my own worth, my own strength. And she listened. I watched as she processed each word, as her face shifted through expressions I could barely read. There was sadness, yes, but also curiosity. A quiet comprehension that we were both more human, more fragile, more real than I had ever allowed myself to admit. For the first time in 25 years, I felt like I could breathe without fear, because even in the telling of it, there was understanding. We talked for hours. The sun moved across the sky, painting the kitchen in streaks of golden light, and still, she asked questions. Small, careful questions at first. Did he ever try to reach out? Did you ever want him back? Were you angry at him? And I answered honestly, without filtering my emotions. I told her that yes, I had wanted him back sometimes, though not always. That anger had come and gone in waves. That grief had visited me quietly every night, settling in like a shadow I could never quite shake. Each answer brought us closer, dismantling years of protective walls I had built between us. I could see her processing my words, the way she tilted her head, the way her brow furrowed slightly, the way her lips pressed together as if she were tasting the weight of my experiences before accepting them. I realized that for all those years, I had assumed she needed protection from the truth, but perhaps what she needed most was to see that honesty could survive, even when it was painful. That it could survive us. There were moments when my voice faltered, when tears escaped and fell onto the table. She reached across without speaking, laying her hand over mine. That simple gesture said everything. She was there. She was present. She understood without needing all the details. And in that silence, brief though it was, I felt the bond we had forged over the years deepen in ways I could not have imagined. I told her about the small things, the hidden moments that shaped our lives. About the letters from Daniel I never sent back. About the birthday cards I hid, fearing they would confuse her. About the time I considered moving across the country just to escape the memories. She listened quietly, nodding, sometimes squeezing my hand, sometimes just letting me speak. I realized that this was the first real conversation we had ever had, not about school, not about chores, not about daily life, but about the raw, messy truths of our shared past. She asked me if I had ever felt like giving up completely, and I had to admit that I had. There were nights when the thought of facing the world, of continuing to lie and protect, felt unbearable. But I had survived for her. I had survived for the moments when she would smile at me with trust in her eyes, when she would fall asleep in my arms, when she would laugh at a joke only I would understand. Those small, seemingly insignificant moments had been my lifeline. And then she asked something I had never expected. "Mom, do you forgive him?" My breath caught. I paused, considering how to answer. Did I forgive him for leaving? For the years of uncertainty, the absence, the lies I had to invent to keep her safe? I told her that forgiveness was complicated, that it was something I was still learning, but that I did not want to carry anger any longer. That holding on to resentment would only chain me to the past and prevent me from moving forward. She nodded again, a quiet understanding passing between us. And in that nod, I saw the reflection of my own growth, the proof that honesty could heal, that connection could survive the hardest truths. We continued talking until the light began to fade, and I realized I had been speaking for hours without pause. We laughed briefly at memories I had once thought too painful to recount, and we cried, a mixture of grief and relief and newfound closeness. For the first time in decades, I felt like the silence had ended, not just the silence I had kept, but the silence that had defined us both. That night, as we prepared for bed, Emily hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm glad you told me, Mom. I'm glad you didn't stay silent." And I realized that my years of silence had not been a failure, but a preparation, a long, painful training in patience and resilience that had finally led to this moment of truth and connection. For the first time in my life, I felt like we were truly free, bound together not by what was hidden, but by the honesty we now shared. After that day, the house was quieter than usual, though not empty. There was a sense of presence, a feeling that the walls themselves had absorbed something, as if they too were listening. Emily had returned to her room, but I could hear the soft hum of her music, a calm that reminded me she was processing, digesting, understanding. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the coffee cup I hadn't touched, thinking about how much of my life had been lived in fear. 25 years of careful words, careful actions, careful omissions, all to protect her, all to shield us from a truth I had believed would break her. And now, in the aftermath, I realized that it was not the truth that could have broken her, it was the absence of it. The following days were strange. We moved through routines as usual, yet everything had shifted. She would glance at me sometimes, her expression searching, and I would know she was replaying my words, my confessions, my fears, my honesty. I found myself reflecting constantly on those 25 years, on the countless mornings I had woken up exhausted and anxious, on the nights I had cried alone, wondering if the life I had built for her was enough. It had been enough, I realized, but only now because honesty had been introduced, because the walls of silence had finally crumbled, because the unspoken had been spoken. Emily approached me quietly one evening, sitting down at the edge of the couch beside me. "Mom," she said softly, "can I ask you more questions?" There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only trust and curiosity. And for the first time, I welcomed the questions. I wanted her to ask, to know, to understand. I began telling her about moments I had never shared, small details of life with Daniel, the arguments that were never loud enough to shatter the house, but loud enough to leave invisible marks, the nights I had doubted myself, and the days I had pushed through simply because she needed me. I told her about the birthday cards I had hidden, about the letters I had kept, about my own moments of fear and regret. She listened, fully present, sometimes nodding, sometimes silent, sometimes offering her hand for reassurance. We laughed a little over memories that had once felt too painful to mention. We cried, together, the way people do when the truth finally lands and touches something raw and vulnerable inside. And in those moments, I realized that what I had thought was protection had actually been a barrier. It had been my own fear masquerading as care. And now, for the first time, I was allowing her and myself to live in truth. In the following weeks, Emily and I continued to talk, to share, to rebuild our connection on honest terms. We revisited old photographs, laughed over memories we had both forgotten, and discussed events I had long buried in my own mind. She asked about Daniel, about his life after he left, and I answered as honestly as I could, without judgment, without anger, only the simple truth. Sometimes it was uncomfortable, sometimes it was painful, but it was necessary. Each story, each answer, became a stitch in the tapestry of trust we were weaving anew. I began to notice changes in Emily too. She seemed lighter, more open, more willing to share her own thoughts, feelings, and fears. She no longer looked at me with the quiet caution of a child afraid of the unknown. She looked at me as a woman, as someone capable of understanding and embracing the complexity of our lives. And in that gaze, I found a profound relief and a quiet joy I had not felt in decades. One evening, after another long conversation that spanned hours, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Mom, I'm glad you finally spoke. I'm glad you didn't stay silent." And I realized that my silence had not been a failure. It had been preparation, a long, painful training in patience and resilience that had led to this moment of freedom and connection. The years of hiding, the years of fear, the years of careful lies, all of it had culminated in a shared understanding, a shared strength, a bond that was deeper than any I could have imagined. In those days, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. Fear masquerades as love, but honesty is stronger. Protecting someone does not mean withholding truth. It means guiding them through it with compassion and clarity. Silence can last decades, but one brave question can dismantle it all. And sometimes it is in asking that question, in seeking truth, that we find freedom, not just for ourselves, but for those we love. Emily and I now live in that freedom. Our conversations are honest, our laughter genuine, our silences shared, not fearful. We argue sometimes, of course, as any mother and daughter will, but there is a transparency now that was never there before. I have learned that being brave is not about never feeling fear. It is about choosing to speak, to connect, and to embrace vulnerability even when it is uncomfortable. And in doing so, we have rebuilt a life where trust is tangible, where love is honest, and where silence no longer defines us. I am no longer silent. I cannot be. And I never will be again. For anyone listening, carrying a secret you think protects someone, ask yourself, is your silence really protection, or is it fear disguised as care? Because love is stronger than fear. Truth is stronger than silence. And sometimes, it takes just one brave question to set us free, to heal, to connect, and to transform years of hidden pain into a shared journey of understanding, growth, and unbreakable bond. The night after our conversations, as Emily drifted off to sleep, I sat by the window and thought about the 25 years of silence that had led us to this moment. I realized that life is not measured by the absence of mistakes, the perfection of actions, or the avoidance of pain, but by the courage to face the truth, to speak honestly, and to embrace the vulnerability that comes with love. That night, I finally understood that our story, with all its cracks, shadows, and unspoken moments, was not a tragedy. It was a journey. And now, finally, it was a shared one.